One, two, three, one, two.
So I'm here with my friend Andrew Danforth. He just released his debut album, Homegrown, and we're going to discuss that a little bit, some of the musical influences that go into it. Tell me a little bit about yourself first and the record.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm a jazz trombone player from Indianapolis, Indiana, which has a big jazz history there. Something I was really proud to be a part of. It also happens to be in the Midwest, which has birthed a lot of really great music in other genres. This album that I made is, I would consider it a jazz album, but it has a lot of influences in other genres that are really important to me. One being Midwest emo, which is a genre that started in the Midwest, obviously, in Illinois. It is really central to the natural landscape and the social landscape of the Midwest.
Hmm.
And it's something I didn't really discover until, my early 20s, but it's something that I really bonded with. And we'll get more into that. But I guess more about the album, Homegrown. It's my album. We've got tenor sax, trombone, bass, piano, drums, standard jazz quintet with trombone. And I had a lot of fun writing all the music. It's all original music.
So I think a lot of jazz fans probably have never really checked out emo as a genre and maybe don't even know really what it sounds like. So what are some of the musical elements? Obviously, there's no vocals on this record. Um, there's not like the sort of stereotypical things people think of when they hear emo, like the whiny vocals, which is not going to be an instrumental music. So the what are the musical components of emo that you found that you're actually able to transfer into a jazz compositional framework?
Beyond that, a lot of the characteristics of emo that I really like um, are the odd meters, which I don't really think of as odd meter. I don't think of it like, oh, here's a bar of seven, oh, here's a bar of five. Um, I really think of it in terms of elisions of phrases, um, cutting off a beat. But you'll notice in a lot of this music in emo, and then what I tried to convey through this album is there's always a layering of different meters. So it always comes back to the same point. Like you can have a figure, the very common figure in emo is like a bar of four, a bar of three, and then two bars of four, and that will cycle over again. And you can have other stuff underneath that, like um, you're someone else is playing through the half note, someone else is dividing through the quarter note, and a lot of how it was actually written when it was first coming around in the early 90s, late 80s. I mean, they weren't writing this stuff down. They were just saying, okay, you play in three, you do this phrase in four, and then when we meet back together, then we'll go on to like the verse or the chorus or something. And that's been very hard to do in a jazz setting because we're so used to looking at a chart, bringing a lead sheet and figuring that out. So what ends up happening is these scores look more like orchestral scores.
Yeah, let me pull up your score for Homegrown so people can see what you're talking about. Yeah, so I see what you mean. It's like this is how many pages? 45 pages and, in landscape, so it's about 4 bars per page. So this is not like a 20 bar melody and then some blowing changes. Like this is really
Right.
through composed. We've got this part where there's this kind of flowing thing happening in the piano under some pads, and then we've got more rhythmic elements happening.
It's one thing I really appreciate about rock musicians is, you have your role in the band and you play your role to support the band. Everything you do is in service of the music, and I think sometimes that's lost in jazz, because it can be a bit self. serving, and as you see from my score, it's very self-serving.
Yeah.
Like I wrote exactly what I wanted to write. I like that aspect of rock. I think even beyond the compositional aspect, I like that kind of engagement that the band members have, just to do your role, know your part, know your position in the band, and you know, play that bar 7 followed by a bar 8 till you can't anymore.
It's nice to see like a lot of dynamics in the chart too. I mean, there's clearly like a lot of shape, and not everyone playing the same. Like there's ensemble dynamics, but there's also, you know, seeing different stuff written in the bass part and the piano part than what's in the horns is like, because then, you know, when you listen to this, you're going to hear like shifting, you're going to hear different things taking
Yeah.
prevalence at different times, which is really nice. And also, I think, you know, you kind of say it's like self-serving and you're putting a lot that has to be played, but at the same time, having this much written, I think, means that when you do get to improvise and solo, like everyone is really in the space of this particular piece. Like you're kind of keeping people in this song rather than like, you know, if you play 20 bars and then okay, we're swinging, like people are going to play their stuff.
Right.
And in this case, it's like you're really taking people outside of what might be their comfort zone. But you mentioned you know, this band maybe is familiar with both styles enough that they're kind of able to get there with you.
Well, I made them get familiar with it. So,
Yeah,
but
got it.
no, I mean,
That's what a good
they're
band leader does.
they're right there. You go. There, you know, there are other bands that weren't in the emo genre that I really got inspiration from. My biggest musical inspiration for a long time was Radiohead, and that has a lot of emo elements. You know, Smashing Pumpkins was one of my biggest influences too,
Mm.
and they have a lot of those same things where they're doing a lot of elisions. The phrases maybe don't line up like they would in a traditional like song form, like we play in jazz, and that was always really interesting to me because it's always in service of the music. I know we were talking before we started recording about American Football, which is probably the most famous Midwest emo band. Let's just everything and how you're talking about the first track Never Meant on their first LP. It's immediately in phrasing in bars of 3, but it feels so natural. I mean, you would have to be actively thinking about the phrase, especially as if you're not, you know, familiar with,
Yeah,
if you're
non-musicians
not,
might not
you know,
even notice like, oh, these are
right.
3 bar phrases, you know. It just sounds it flows a little differently, but you wouldn't necessarily notice unless you're listening for that element. Real quick, for people who maybe don't know what you mean by elision, this compositional technique, I wanted to look at just I see it on the first page of Homegrown. Let me share that. So correct me if I'm wrong, but an elision is when you take a figure like this 3-beat figure, and then you're not writing a new 2-bar figure, you're just chopping off bar B3, right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you're lopping off a beat. Um,
Where this is different
and
pitches, but you know, same shape happening in bar 2, but only 2 beats.
I consider it's different than I think what a lot of jazz odd times can boil down to is there's not a melody that you're taking a section out of. Like you're lopping off a beat, but the melody is phrased through that. You're not, I guess, destroying part of the melody. I think sometimes, especially in like arrangements, when we, as jazz musicians, which we all do, we want to put something in 7 or put it in 3, put a different meter on it, put something in 5.
Mhm.
Then we're altering that original melody, and I try and always make sure my melody is serviced by the meter, and I don't want to have a melody and then chop off part of the melody. I'll do that with the form, I'll do that with these certain grooves, but usually I'll try and lay out the groove and then come up with a melody, because it is really interesting going back to talking about vocals. The lyrics usually, you know, they're always recorded last on these on rock albums, and yeah, when you have lyrics, then the melody sometimes, maybe this is not a great opinion, but it's my opinion. So, but like when you have a lyrics and you have words, then the melody sometimes is not as paramount. And so then you can get away with a simpler melody, or maybe a melody that doesn't change a lot of notes. Like oftentimes, if you'll hear jazz musicians playing a cover of a pop song or a rock song or something, there's a lot of repeated notes on the same note because it's lyrics, but we don't have that. So that is tricky, and I try not to. I have to be really careful about how I write melodies in this genre, because if I write it like I do, like a traditional, like a vocalist would, then it sometimes it doesn't come out uh, how I want it to. Because I still love jazz, and I want that to be, you know, that's the medium that I'm in, that's the genre that I'm in. So I want to have a creative melody, something that goes in different directions and has a nice arc to it. um, and that can be hard when you have these illusions in there like that, but I'm always writing the melody with that in mind. I never want to sacrifice the melody for that meter, if that makes
Mm,
sense.
yeah. And so the in Homegrown, as an example, the melodies are um the phrasing is very, like you mentioned, orchestral music earlier. This is not like bebop inspired phrasing, post bop kind of phrasing. These are like long, a lot of held notes, connected, with scalar kind of fragments, while other stuff is happening in the rhythm section. And that, from my very limited listening I've done sort of to check out some of these bands like American Football, that's kind of how these vocal melodies work. Like there's a lot of holding out syllables.
I think that, you know, I don't know if I actively thought about that when writing stuff like this, but it makes sense as uh, part of the structure of the genre. Like if you have, like, a lot of these songs are built off guitar riffs, and so you
Mm,
have these two, maybe sometimes two guitar riffs in different meters or different phrasings that are playing off of each other. They're really busy. So, and you have the drums and bass in there as well. The bass is kind of holding down maybe even its own metric pattern across the phrase. But, you know, to have a melody in there that is, I guess, more like a bebop melody or something like that, it would just be way too much. It would be overloading. So you're kind of forced to write like that. You have no choice but to create a long, drawn out melody, and a lot of the stuff on the album is like that. You know, even if we go over to Orange Hue in the Uplands, that track, as you see, like that bass line right in the intro, it ends up turning into the trombone and tenor sax figure. So it kind of comes out of that. But in that
oh
way,
yeah.
I would not even I would consider that more like the trombone and tenor sax. Those would be like guitar riffs. They're playing off of each other. They're going in different phrases. I do think that it's really important for jazz music to have a strong melody, and so sometimes this doesn't have a very strong melody in my opinion. You know, maybe if I had thought about it more, I would have tried to come up with a more creative way to have a melody in there.
No, I
But
think
you know,
there's
you want this
definitely
one to be a little.
this one definitely feels melodically strong to me. I think there's always like a shifting focal points, maybe like in different parts of the group, but it always feels like there's something new happening, which I really like about it. Um, I have it playing right now in my headphones, and I was just the sort of the big departure I think from the influences that we've talked about is the sort of overall aesthetic is like a more, you've got a big dynamic range, but I feel like it leans more on like a mellower side of things and like a prettier kind of
Yeah,
vibe overall. Who are your influences in the jazz world? I think I can hear that definitely. Like you mentioned, Radiohead,
yeah,
and Radiohead obviously is a huge influence on. We hear people like Brad Meldau playing this music and in this kind of style where it makes
yeah,
it very beautiful and I think often not takes the edge off, but it's not like there's the distortion's not there. Sometimes the tempos are slower and this stuff, it it puts it in a different musical setting. But so yeah, coming out of the jazz world, other than I'm sure Brad Meldau's like an obvious example. Who else do you consider maybe being like of the same concept?
Well, it's funny because I honestly, I'm showing my hand. Maybe this is embarrassing. I really don't listen to Brad Meldau at all.
Oh, okay.
I should. Yeah, for this kind of stuff, I honestly think it's probably like Fareed Hawk. He's a guitar player.
Fareed Hawk. I'm unfamiliar.
He's incredible musician, and he's also similar to me. He comes from both a classical and a jazz background,
Can you
which
spell that for me?
Fareedhaque, and he's an incredible classical guitar player and rock guitar, fusion guitar, jazz guitar.
Oh, very cool.
He's often, I think he's like won awards for being like the best, whatever the best means, the best world guitarist. Um, but he has a really, he has a lot he can do with his sound palette and his dynamic palette, which I really like. And becoming so I came from an orchestral background. I wanted to be an orchestral trombone player for a long time, and I think because of that, I draw a lot of my sound influences from that actually. And I love playing with a big sound, and I love being able to use that sound in a really small dynamic.
Hmm.
um, I like playing on bigger equipment because I feel like I can get a different timbre on the softer ends that's really mellow. I also started out as a euphonium player, so I like a big mellow sound. And I mean, Fareed is not. I don't think he's. I wouldn't consider his sound big and mellow, but his dynamic control and his palette of sounds he has is really broad. And so I'm trying to. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to play like that. I'm trying to have a sound like that where I can curate my own palette. I know I keep saying palette over again.
So, oh yeah, speaking of trombone sounds, so two solo pieces that you play, the acapella, I guess you'd call it,
Hmm.
trombone. It's
Yeah,
vacate and vacant,
vacant
right?
and vacate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, there's some sounds in there. Were you doing like vocalizations while you were playing?
Yeah, so we actually,
Mm.
it's all natural acoustics, natural distortion. So it's something I, started doing when I was in my master's. Well, actually, no, there was like a broken piano in one of the Indiana University practice rooms, and I would go in there and play euphonium, and the sustain pedal had broken, and so you went into the room and played, and all the strings would resonate throughout the room,
Love
and I
that.
was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is so cool.
I've messed around with
So I
that
used
too.
Yeah, so those both of those tracks where we just opened up the bed of the grand piano. I had my producer step
Yes.
on the sustain pedal, and then
Okay.
I
I was
would
going to ask
play
you
into
about the
that.
reverb on that. I was like, is this recorded in a tunnel? I mean, it really, I know a fair number of reverb sounds, and I was like really thrown off by that. And I've even heard
Ah,
that sound before. But I guess if you close mic the piano, then you get like this huge. It sounds like you're playing in a tunnel. Or I sometimes practice in my
yeah,
parking garage. I go down to like the sixth basement of my building and play down there, and it's like that kind of reverb. So it's very cool that you're able to get that
yeah,
in the studio naturally.
yeah. It was nice. We had a mic on my neck too because I
Mm.
do a lot of uh, vocalizations. I'll hum when I play. I'll do split tones up here too, and so we were trying to get that, and then so we had that on a mic, and then we had a speaker set up underneath the piano so that it would come across more on the recording. So we had the speaker directly from my mic into the piano bed.
Oh,
Um,
that's really cool.
but I love stuff like that. I mean, I listen to a lot of Colin Stetson and Peter
Yeah.
Evans, and I love finding all the natural distortion on the instrument. I think it's really fascinating. yeah, back to that tunnel thing. There's a video of Pharoah Sanders playing in a tunnel in San Francisco with a harmonium player, and he's doing his Pharoah Sanders thing, and it's just, it knocks me out every time. I mean, I used to sit in my room in high school with all the lights off and listen to that, just
That's awesome. Yeah.
bask in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
having bandmates who are really curious about different genres and have a lot of different influences is so important. But also, man, the tradition is so important. I mean, having band members that can play, Blueberry Hill and Surrey with the Fringe on top, and being able to play that in the correct style with the correct intros and endings and trading forms and whatnot. So I really respect those guys a lot because they can do so much. And this was a lot to ask. I mean, this is a 45-page score for a trombone player's album. So
Yeah, I imagine the parts were probably only 3 or 4 pages, but it still is, it's a lot to put together, and these
I mean,
sections are not like the same.
yeah, I mean, I
Like you got an H on here, we usually see A B A, and then we got all the way to H.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so but that's awesome. I think, and before anyone gets the wrong idea that you're like someone who's like trying to go outside, like, yeah, more standards than a lot of players I know. So I mean, yeah, you're definitely steeped in the tradition. Like um you can certainly say that stuff too. And so yeah, I mean, with a score like this, yeah, like I said, there's no part on here that looks technically hard, but as a band, I imagine it was difficult.
yeah. It's hard. It's also because I think traditionally as jazz players, if we're thinking of 11, we think of that the two at the very end. I think that's, and we also think of it a lot slower. Like I was talking to the bass player that toured with us, Brandon Keller Tuberg, incredible bass player from Australia who grew up listening to Midwest emo. Apparently, Midwest emo is huge in Australia, but
Crazy.
he's like a fiend for odd meter jazz and really inventive, creative stuff. And he was saying, yeah, they like playing 11 slow is so hard. He was like, you have to be focused the whole time. He's like, playing 11 fast is like no problem. And I never even thought about that. Because this is, for me, this is like the extent of my odd meter stuff. I don't really enjoy playing super fast odd meter things. To me, it probably just because I'm a trombone player and I'm really slow, and it's hard. Thanks so much for having me on. Andrew Danforth. Here's my album. It's called Homegrown. Wearing the shirt, got some merch. It's on all streaming services, but you can find me on Bandcamp and purchase a CD. It will be hand mailed. I do all the shipping and handling, so happy to send anyone a CD. This is this was a really fun project for me to work on, and I was really proud of the product. Yeah, and thanks so much for having me on to talk about this stuff. I love talking about Midwest emo. It's got a special place in my heart.